I want to first introduce Nora and then introduce Patricia Williams, who will be joining us for discussion of these films after the screenings. So Nora Philippe, many of you, if you come to the earlier screenings, you know that she is the curator of this series, and this is the third series that we've curated together at the Maison Française and School of the Arts. And we're especially pleased tonight to present her newest film, Like Dolls, I'll Rise. This is the New York premiere of the film, and so really a very special honor to be able to present it. I should add that she, as curator of the series, of course, did not suggest including her own film and resisted it, but I really insisted because I thought not only does it fit beautifully into the theme of the series, but it's a beautiful, exceptional film, and I'm really, really happy to be able to include it, and happy she finally overcame her resistance and allowed us to include it. So Nora has wears many different hats, has many different talents. She had a background initially in art history and has studied, among other topics, has studied how whiteness became the norm in art history, and that's something that is very much at play in her film that you'll be seeing this evening. And she also has studied filmmaking and curating and is a film director and producer. She's directed or produced a dozen films, mostly on issues of social and political importance. Some of her earlier films include Job Center, Please Hang On, and Les Indes Sortilèges de James Ensor. She has a current film project actually about bartered women, which began a couple of years ago when she was in New York, and she interviewed a number of women who were students at the time and plans to follow them over years and hopefully decades to see how they evolve. So that's an ongoing project. And the film that we're seeing this evening, Like Dolls I'll Rise, is a film about a collection of hundreds of black dolls that were created anonymously for the most part between the 1840s and 1940s in the United States. And Nora also will be talking about this more after the screening. She also curated an exhibition of these dolls at La Maison Rouge in Paris that received great critical acclaim and had a tremendous public response. The press coverage is 400 or 500 pages, so I mean really it got an enormous response, and I hope that we'll hear from her about some of the responses she got to that exhibit. One of the reviews was written by Patricia Williams for The Nation. And she also created a catalog and curated a film series at the Pompidou Center and held a symposium about black dolls in connection with the exhibit and film. Like Dolls I'll Rise has been shown in 12 countries since its premiere at the Vision du Réel in Switzerland. Those showings include at the London Feminist Film Festival, where it won the Audience Award, and at the Calcutta Film Festival, where it was given the Women's Achievement Award for Best Documentary Short Film. It had its premiere in the U.S. in New Orleans and has been shown, among other places, in St. Louis and at the Virginia Film Festival, where it was recently awarded the Best Documentary Short Film. So we're so happy to be able to show Like Dolls I'll Rise this evening. I'm going to briefly introduce Patricia Williams as well. She is the James L. Dorr Professor of Law at Columbia Law School. Professor Williams has published widely in areas of race, gender, and law, and on other issues of legal theory and legal writing. Her books include, I'll mention just a few, The Rooster's Egg on the Persistence of Prejudice, Seeing a Colorblind Future, The Paradox of Race, and Open House on Family, Food, Piano Lessons, and the Search for a Room of My Own, and The Alchemy of Race and Rights, Diary of a Law Professor, which was named one of the feminist classics of the last 20 years that literally, quote, literally changed women's lives by Ms. Magazine. Professor Williams also writes a column for The Nation entitled Diary of a Mad Law Professor, and has appeared on radio and television shows around the world and in documentary films, including one that she wrote and narrated called That Rush. She holds a number of honorary doctorates and has held fellowships at various institutions, including the School of Criticism and Theory at Dartmouth, the Humanities Research Institute of the University of California at Irvine, the Institute for Arts and Civic Dialogue at Harvard, and the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. She's also received a number of other awards, including a MacArthur Fellowship, and has served on the Board of Trustees at Wellesley College. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Nora. And I will now turn it over to Nora to say a few words about the first two films.
Thank you, Shani P, and thank you very much for inviting the film. It was indeed with resistance that I welcomed the idea, but I thank you so much, and I take it as an exercise of reflexivity, of how I actually conceived this film in conversation with other films on the topic. Some of them I'm actually showing them in this film series, so in these terms, I think it's interesting to put the film in dialogue with the others. And thank you again to Gavin Brown. I don't know where he is, but it's a real privilege to show films in these conditions. It's really a beautiful screening room. I'm really happy to show le bleu, blanc, rouge de mes cheveux. You have to know that bleu, blanc, rouge are the colors of the French flag, and indeed the story is about French citizenship and how citizenship can have to do, unfortunately, I may say, with hair. It's a wonderful film by Joshua Jembe, which has been immensely successful in France and abroad. It's been to dozens of countries. It's won several awards and has been nominated at the César the same year as Alice Diop and Mamada Doucouré in 2017, which is interesting to note. And I asked her about her new project, and she wrote to me that now she's working, which is a very good news, working on her debut film, her first feature-length film, which is about homosexuality in prison. So I really hope that we'll be able to show her next film soon here in New York. And Clément Cogitor is now a very, very renowned artist. He's a polymath. He works in several media. And Les Indes galantes, I won't say much because it has multiple layers of meaning. So we'll explore this afterwards during the conversation. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that it's not a documentary on an opera or on something that happened on the Paris Opera stage that day, but it's completely staged. He created it with a choreographer, Bintou Dembélé, and Bintou Dembélé has written me a note too about the next steps of the project, and I'll tell you more about it during the conversation. I'll end my little speech with sincere thanks to Patricia Williams, who's been a constant guide, I may say, during the preparation of the exhibition, of the Black Dolls exhibition. She contributed with a very important text, original text about topsy-turvy dolls to the Black Dolls catalog, and so it's very moving to me that she's here tonight, and also very moving to show the film at Columbia University, because actually the project was born when I was living here, and it's thanks to Shani that I met so many scholars here who helped me in conceiving the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. This is such a remarkable film. I remember a few years ago when you were in New York, you first telling me about this project, and you showed me a book that had pictures of the dolls in this collection, and telling me that you wanted to make a film about it. And I had a really hard time picturing what that would look like, because dolls are, they're static, they're three-dimensional objects. I was having a really hard time imagining what kind of film you would make from this collection. And so it's just been amazing to be there at the beginning and see the really remarkable result. I thought you might start by just telling us where you began, where I think you started with the photographs of the dolls, but maybe what was your entry point? What did you start with, and then where did that lead you?
I wasn't under the same impression until almost the end that it was not this film was not feasible, or that it was extremely difficult, or that I had not the right to do it, to make it. So I spent 2 years asking myself how to handle this, the dolls, the voices, and the stories I heard when I saw them. So I lived in New York when I first found out about the existence of this collection, and very quickly I had the authorization of the collector to make a film, an independent film about the dolls, and a few months after finding the book. I have a good friend who's a DOP, who's also a filmmaker, who was coming to New York, and he accepted to come with me and film the dolls. We set up a studio. It was it was mere craftsmanship. It was we had no budget, and it's Emmanuel Gras, who was in the middle of shooting his feature-length documentary called Entitled Magella. He films a man who coal, yeah, you call it charbon coal, whose job is to extract and sell some coal in Congo. And so he had been reflecting about how to film, let's say, the black body for 4 years. He had not shot yet, and now his film is beautiful. It's Magella. It was in Cannes last year. And we were both in this extremely let's say, we had we were obsessed with our responsibility of how to do this, and at the same time we really had the wish to experiment, to work with our intuitions. So we worked for 2 days and 2 nights with the dolls. It was just out of intuition. So I had read hundreds of slave narratives. I knew a few things. I had scenes of it was about night, that was for sure. So we worked with a moonlight night. I had a few scenes on my mind. The train departure. I thought about the Great Migration, but leaving a place.
So the grouping of the figures as
yeah,
waiting for a train.
Yeah, so the dolls are very fragile. So we hadn't the right to. I mean, we couldn't stage them, and it would have been impossible anyway, for many reasons. So I just put them on pedestals, and then it was through the camera work. It was through the movement of the camera that we could tell a story. And I also had images of burials. But we experimented many things, and also the group. I had a gospel on my mind, and I wanted to film the group of dolls. And from the beginning, if I had I was certain of one thing, is that the dolls were watching us. That I really wanted the dolls to be witnesses and to be subjects who are watching us, and not us watching things. That was what I wanted to create. So, and then the editing, the research took a year and a half, and the editing a year. So we had no budget, so we would edit one week, and then I would do some research for 3 months, and then we would meet again with my editor. And so the film is also loaded with so many things of our lives, about motherhood, about adoption, with my editor, because I've been working with her for 8 years. So the film is really, full of many things, And also, of course, I mean, I'm not mentioning it, but that was the very substance of the film, was the conversations I had with artists or activists I know here who are African-American, who, for some of them who participated to the film, like Nicole Seeley, who's the poet who wrote the original poems. Each time it happens 4 times in the film. Each time that there's a zoom on one doll, it's her voice and the poems she composed out of the footage she saw. So yeah, I'm not going to be longer.
Thanks. And so a few more questions about the photographing that you did with Emmanuel Gras. What were some of the choices that you made? I noticed that there's a black background behind the dolls. You talked about the sort of moonlit feeling that you wanted to create. There are a lot of, I guess it's mostly manually focused, so that you can zoom in and out and get close shots. There are a lot of detailed shots. There are group shots. Talk a little bit about the formal choices that you made in terms of the shooting of those scenes.
Yes, there were 2 other certainties we were traveling with, let's say. It's that first thing, The dolls are absolutely singular objects. They are made out of it's art, it's craft. There were they aren't like schools of doll making or cottage industries. They are really very individual and subjective creations. And so we wanted our filmmaking to be as artisanal, as crafty as the dolls were. So I really had quilting on my mind, and the recycling of materials. So and we didn't have any choice. We had no budget. So basically we would like use like a chair, with wheels, and then do the tracking shots this way. It was it was really make do. But we had this certainty of really wanting to have some symmetry between the fabric of the dolls and the fabric of the film is something that we worked a lot on in post-production. Hence all the work on fabric textures in the film, and also it was very complicated to handle, but they are also museum objects. These dolls have so many layers of being, of meaning. So they're also museum objects now, and we couldn't negate that. They are now viewed through the prisms, through the angle of these are, they belong to a history that is now shown in museums. And so I didn't want to erase, for instance, the presence of pedestals. And at the same time, I didn't want to film them only as museum objects. So, for instance, the white cube, the art gallery is now white. It's the color of neutrality and of art galleries. And of course, I wanted to avoid that. So I preferred to choose a background that was of the same. We had a very hard time choosing the fabric actually, but of the same material as the dolls.
Okay, two more questions before I forget. We move on to other things, and then I'm going to turn to Pat Williams. There were a couple of the shots. There's one, several of them actually, where it looks like the doll's spirit or soul is rising out of the body. At least that's what it evoked for me. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how that was created. And then there was one anecdote that you told me about the other day about something that happened with the tracking shots or the zooms on one of the dolls. So if you'd like to share that story, I think that's a very moving story too.
From the moment I found this book, that it was published at Radius Books in New York in 2015 with a beautiful text by Faith Ringgold, actually, and Margaret Jefferson. I would carry it all the time with me, the books. I would talk with people over the subway, to everyone. What does this doll suggest to you? Does it remind of something, And most people were afraid. Whatever skin color or history the people had, their first reaction often was, "Oh, it's spooky," and I've never been able to be afraid. I mean, I don't understand why one should be afraid of these dolls. I just don't understand that. So they really just But so I tried to understand that, and even during the show, people were not afraid at all. That the public was very, very moved. But even the warden, the people who got the gods in the show, told me that the atmosphere was very loaded, and that it was really they felt some presence, and but if you have if you remember your own childhood memories, or if you have children and you observe them while they're playing with dolls definitely have souls. And they can be, one doll can be a mother in the morning, then a child in the evening, then in the afternoon it will be an object, and then it will be, my daughter keeps, there are like so multiple scripts with whatever doll they children play with. So anyway, the soul. So cinema is a good means of making souls exist. And also, I was very struck by a concept by Christina Sharp in The Wake. I always felt that if those dolls are so present, are so intense, it's that they can't rest. They don't have the right to rest. And my wish was to imagine that someday they could rest at last, and that is, yeah.
Okay, and what about the second, the story that you told me?
Oh yeah, the pulsating heart.
I think that's worth sharing.
Well, it was a very you know, I don't know if you've read Achille Mbembe, but basically in his last books, he develops on the notion of fetish, which has always been the racist colonial perspective of, especially, I mean, you know, colonial powers, but of French, on, you know, African art, and I really wanted to avoid, I'm sorry, I'm just taking a long way, but I always wanted to avoid the belief that these dolls, you know, had a, like, were voodoo, or had like a religious function, and I really, and many people, even, you know, African scholars, African-American scholars who visited the show would tell me, yeah, but they did have a function. I was like, yeah, sure, but we can't prove it. So I really wanted to stay away. I was like saying, you know, these are dolls that belong to children, and let's focus about, for instance, Black children who were always, you know, denied any existence, any rights, or any innocence. So anyway, but yes, indeed, during the film, during the audio mix, it's really the final stage of when you make a film, and it was actually the first time we were seeing on a big screen, and the sound engineer, we were working on one of these sequences with Nicole's voice, and he said, "Wow, this is wonderful. How did you do this in post-production? The chest is pulsating, is vibrating." And so okay, can we rewind and see it again? And indeed, there was a flow in the picture at the level of the chest, really at the level of the heart, actually, and the image was moving. So this happens. It's a technical flow that can exist, but on the overall picture, it's explainable when you use a type of lens. So it was this. I was like, yeah, this is funny. This is a technical problem we'll solve, because my first reaction was like, yeah, but it's not intentional, and so people will think it's intentional, so it's kitsch. I mean, I just can't animate, you know, a doll with a pulsate. I mean, this is kitsch. So we have to, you know, to suppress this. And I called the DOP, Emmanuel Gras, and the video post-production guy, and everyone, like, could you, where did the problem occur? Is it when we filmed? Is it, you know, when we edited? And there was no rational explanation at all. Like, we were able to soften it, to soften the movement, but never completely erase it. And we can explain it. It's fine. It's just, yeah. Wow. No, I'm not saying any, I mean, it's just an anecdote. It was just, I'm telling, it's interesting, just in terms of intention. What do you do when you're working with these objects? Because everything is meaningful, everything conveys something. So what do you do? What do you let happen? Yeah.
Right. So let's bring Pat Williams into the conversation and just start with an open-ended question for you about your response to this film, what it says to you, how your experience of the film is different from seeing the exhibit that you also saw in Paris. So just starting with your general reactions and thoughts.
I mean, I think that the complexity of it is to some extent captured by what Nora just described, in terms of a desire that these dolls be experienced as witnessing the audience, while at the same time there's such attention to the fact that they are objects whose, who are receiving this kind of very carefully curated spectatorship, and these are objects. They are not witnessing. They are not gazing. They are not vibrating and pulsing, and it seems to me that the care and the thoughtfulness that you put into the curation is about that relationship that lets us feel as though they are witnessing us, and therefore makes us quite aware of where we are standing in relation to these objects. And for me, and I think I put this in the monograph, you know, it made me think of Ruth Ozeki's Cone, you know, what did you look like before your parents were born? And, you know, at the same time that I first saw this collection and your curation of that collection, the actual installation, I had been going through a family archive with photographs of my 4 mothers and aunts all clinging to mostly white dolls. And then in this collection I found a picture of my great-great-grandmother, which I did not have. It was the subject of my book, Alchemy of Race and Rights. I'd always sort of imagined her. But that made me think of, you know, part of this was assisted by the technology of photography, which is kind of like seeing angels. It's like writing with light to see that, you know, literally that's what photography is. But at the same time, it's a very dangerous proposition to indulge, that therefore I have seen them, or that I understand them, or that I know them, or that what I can read into these apparitions. And so for me, the real story, the narrative at the heart of all of this is to listen to the silence of these objects. They are a kind of expressive conundrum. And so to really sit with that inexpressible, ineffable mystery is the power of all of this to me.
Can we continue this discussion perhaps about the photographs and the photographs that are used in the film? What was involved with, how did you find these photographs? What was involved in researching them? What do you, both of you, interpret of the children who are holding, the white girls who are holding black dolls and black girls who are holding white dolls, and the presence of these photographs in the work? How did you find them, and then how do you both interpret them?
I would like to acknowledge the support of Deborah Willis, who really helped me in this research. She hasn't got much time. I'm not often in New York, so we had like very short appointments, and she would say, because I was looking for, you know, a certain type of photographs or of portraits from certain periods, Colonel. And so, okay, then I would go back and discover amazing collections of photographs at, you know, Cornell University. And so, yeah, I worked, it took me a year to find the photographs I was looking for, and then to license them. So to sum up, it was mainly at Yale and Cornell, in specific collections that I found the pictures of children with dolls. So at the end of the 19th century, most white children are photographed with toys or accessories. Most of white girls are photographed with dolls, which are white. Black dolls are very rare, but not exceptional. So it was all the, you know, so again, silence. Are you showing, you know, a phenomenon, for instance, portraits of white children with black dolls, that is common, or that it's, you can be as precise as this. But I was looking, so this research, the time I dedicated to it, made me understand that there was an absence, a terrible absence in those portraits. It was, and there's one book that exposed this in Argentina. It's Laura Segato, Oedipe Noir, black Oedipe. How do you say in English? Oedipus. Oedipus, black Oedipus. Who and it's the figure of the nanny. So you have, that's why at a certain point I decided I really needed some photographs of nanny, but nanny being black nannies being hidden or disappearing in the picture, not only being shown, but so there are 2 pictures. I don't know if you had time to notice them, but they were really hiding. It can be also agency. They just refuse to be part of the picture, and so they are very complex images. But yeah, so yeah, photographs were an essential part of the speech. Also because in the 19th century there was no there's no footage. So. But then I explored for a year some baby parades footage, and I found this beautiful, the white craziness about the white children innocence, the baby parade. I mean, it's something that is. I mean, it seems to be very. I have a very French gaze on this. It's terrifying, but.
and I mean, but these photographs do reflect very normative conventions of photography, and you mentioned the photographs of knitting, and to attempt to place oneself in some sort of civic respectability or poses of respectability, and I don't. My gut is that was not accidental to put her face behind the curtain. That this was about the white child. It was not about the nanny, and for me it was exactly the kind of almost ritual cover that you then conjoined that image with, which was of the, if not a topsy-turvy doll, the sidesy, widesy, of the white porcelain doll that has been reconfigured with a black veil over the face. That's one of the, I think, the most striking images in the entire collection. And that, and I was struck in all 3 of these films by the ways in which the conventions are pushing against their own limits, and the photography of the hair not fitting in the. I mean, that's such a universal biometric. If you've any passport photo, the United States Post Office actually has an image very much like that, and it says this is what you cannot have in your passport photo. You probably have not noticed that on the wall of your post office, but that's, and so as biometrics, algorithmic biometrics then inscribe this on our body in terms of citizenship and belonging, and then in the French context, when she fills in nationalité, the way in which nationality and citizenship are not quite the same thing, but are so inflected increasingly in the United States in that complex colonial sense that we're at this moment of revoking the 14th Amendment, so that we're going back to a time when people had to perform citizenship in order to prove their citizenship, and there's no sense of automatic birthright belonging. I mean, I think that's the most perilous moment of this time, but a lot of it has to do with what of us is seen, how we have to perform our citizenship, or our belonging, or our nationality, in ways that the frame cuts off or requires us to fit ourselves into the aperture, literally fit through the needle hole of appearance in very particular kinds of ways. And so for me, all 3 of these films were about the incredible the stuff that gets left behind, and so it's the silence behind those photographs. It's the unspoken, the quiet moments in all 3 of these films that really was so effective.
Do you want to say anything in response?
I would like to underline that the Le bleu, blanc, rouge de mes cheveux was inspired to the director by an experience she actually went through. So it's and yeah, the frame again. So I mean, the script is amazingly powerful, and I mean, yeah, it tells everything, and at the same time, the film is extremely subtle. In terms of filmmaking and script writing, it's a miracle, because it seems like a parable. It's very strong, and at the same time, it always remains, at the level of Sena, of the character. It's very difficult to make, and it's because of the actress, of course, but also in terms of the very sensitive way of filming her. It always remains very subtle. So it's why I one of the reasons why I admire this film.
So we can come back to the other 2 films in just a moment. I just wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about, there's one type of doll called a topsy-turvy doll, that we see several examples of, and that's something that you wrote about in the catalog. And I wondered if you could share your thoughts with the audience about what the topsy-turvy doll is, a little bit about the history, and then what your interpretation is of it, and what other possible interpretations might be offered.
A topsy-turvy doll was a very popular form of doll making from into the 1950s, actually, when there were more machine manufactured, or you could actually buy sewing patterns. Back in the days when you had home economics, you could buy sewing patterns, and they were dolls with long skirts, and you flipped them one way, and the skirt would fall over the bottom half and expose a white head, and then you'd flip the doll, and the skirt, there's a skirt conjoined at the hip, but the doll had two heads, and you flipped the other way, and a black head would emerge. And so it's, I've heard this described against today's social backdrops as a biracial doll. This is not about biracial, if there is such a thing as, quote, biracial. I mean, I hate the term because it implies that we're half and half, or that there is such a thing as racial purity to begin with. But the notion that these are conjoined to the hip in some affiliative sense, I think has much more of a sinister representational force of what was mentioned in the film, of black women giving birth to the master's children. And if there is a conjoining, it's between the condition of plantation mistresses and their expressed miseries and whatever diaries of plantation life that have been that were published from that period, and the slave women on plantations. But it's also complex because, as Robin Bernstein has written in her book Racial Innocence, these are toys. These are objects of play given to children, and yet they really reveal secrets by lifting the skirts. And it's such a perfect metaphor for the politics of these only half-hidden sexual relations.
Nora, anything
Shani was actually highlighting that there's a topsy-turvy figure in Le bleu, blanc, rouge de mes cheveux when the two girls are talking together, and it highlights the huge discrepancy between the white girl's experience and about Sena. Her friends just, oh, you're thinking about a guy, and no, it's my life, it's my citizenship, it's existential, really important political and existential choices that are at stake right now for me, and it's very striking.
And that moment is really expressed again in all three of these by a kind of gestural language. I was really struck that there were arm positions. I mean, literally, there were perhaps unchoreographed in a conscious sense, except in the one about Crump. But these arms, these sudden arms, that when she's dancing alone at the party, her arm gestures echo Crump movements, and some of the dolls actually echo those. And then I found it really very powerful when you cut to the sign language, because sign language, this is really about not using words, but using a gestural language that expresses the incredible emotions that escape words. And I think one definition of trauma, psychoanalytically, is an experience that is so powerful that it knocks language out. And so that's another sense of the power that I found at the center of all three, or what linked all three of these.
Yeah. And I think some of what you're saying was echoed as well in some of the sound that was used in the film, where instead of language or narration, there's a kind of ghostly music at some point when some of the dolls are being shot, and you hear whispering, and they're all different kinds of sounds that sort of hint at something else that's gone now, or something that's left a trace, or something that we're not completely understanding, or something that's just out of view. And I think that also really wonderfully supports that idea of what's not being said, what's not clearly visible.
Catherine Zlatkovic is the actress who signs She's the other American. She's the only French. She actually offered to sign in international sign language or in American sign language, but at the same time, we ended up choosing French sign language because she felt more comfortable with it. And she's an activist. She's from Bretagne. She's from Brittany, but has also she identifies as Guadeloupean, and it took out. So the process, the method was I've selected 12, 15 pages of texts, and I sent them to the 4 women who are in the film, and they chose what they wanted to perform and the way they would perform it. And Catherine worked for 2 weeks just to find the sign language that was appropriate for such notions, and she actually invented some of them. Because in French sign language, race is very difficult to convey. And so we'll continue that next August, next summer at a film festival where she's invited and I'm invited. We'll do a workshop about how to, we're continuing the work on how to interpret those topics.
So maybe we should move to talk about the other 2 films a little bit now, and then in a few minutes I'll turn it over to questions from the audience. The film by Clément Cogitor, Les Indes galantes. Maybe it would be good to hear a little bit. Pat, we were talking before coming here about the opera that this is based on and how it's usually staged, and so maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I was sort of knocked back by this. I mean, because on the one hand, you know, I'm sort of familiar with crump as a kind of as a kind of expressive language for you know, for particularly young men and women who are living in very different circumstances. And then there's Rameau's opera, which is staged as a magnificent piece of colonial condescension of the first order. And so this particular, I was sort of stunned when I saw it, because this particular piece of music, the arias against which they're dancing, comes sort of toward the end of the opera, and it is, you know, I was looking at you can find it on Amazon, a sort of traditional staging of it by Thomas Grimm, who actually does a lot of PBS, you know, stagings of American ballet, or, you know, and it is so rudely comical, and it's the part that's called the Dance of Peace, and it's a sort of imagined geography of what Native Americans did for dancing, and it's horrendously offensive, and everybody's, you know, pipes, you know, corncob pipes in their mouth as though this is, you know, it's the peace pipe. It's a ballet, but it's completely comic, and it's comic in a way that isn't just in the tradition of French comedic theater or Italian comedic theater. It is, I found it really crude and offensive. And then so to me, that's the emotional backdrop that really framed for me looking at Cogitor's piece, because it's a response, and so you can look at it on its own. But when I was looking at it, it reminded me of some of the work of Tina Kent, you know, who, when she looked at all these series of photographs, but there's something missing at the center of it, or there's something or Fred Moten, there's a sound at the back that is resonating at the back of it, and I thought it's really startling and worth, for those of you who haven't seen the actual opera, to go to the very end of it. Don't look at the whole thing. Just, the music is lovely, but just look at the end for what I mean. Yeah.
And just to add a piece to that, apparently Rameau had seen a performance of Native American chiefs who had been brought from North America to Paris to meet with the king.
Yeah.
And that was what inspired that piece called Les Sauvages in Les Indes galantes.
And it's very interesting, because literally they had been staged as, you know, for the foreigner, or for the, you know, so they were their own living expositions of something like the World's Fair. They were, you know, they were their own living reenacting museum pieces, but it was so out of context. I mean, that you hear that, not just appropriation, but but something even beyond appropriation in the way the opera is traditionally staged.
The whole opera is about the other. So the second act is about the Turks. The third is about the Incas, and the fourth is about Native Americans. So it's just the category of the other. And what's interesting in Cogitor's project is to completely reverse, to use the opera to invite, it's a carte blanche, to choreographers indeed of African or Arab descent in France, who are very prominent choreographers, to reinterpret and to reuse, say, hey, this is the reality of the other is this one, and we will play it our way. So so it was Bintou Dembele's proposal to use crump, also because of its political meaning and origins. But now, what's interesting to know is that it was actually the first step of a wider project, and it'll be an opera. So, and it's interesting because Cogitor ends the film with Opéra de la Bastille 2017, which is quite meaningful. It's the symbol of French Revolution. So, so in this very conservative Opéra de Paris, next fall there will be an opera that has only urban dances such as crump, and then there will be walking, etc. So, which is something that is symbolically of course innovative, but also politically quite strong.
And there's another dimension to crump in this context, and it actually again a thread in your film and the other, which is the interiority of it. I mean, it is both. This dance is both political, but it's also done in almost a circle where you can't quite see what's going on inside, and we were talking about being hesitant to assign religiosity to any of this, but crump actually stands for kingdom, radical uplift, mighty praise, and it is kind of a kind of, there's a wonderful book by a man named Kevin Quashie called The Sovereignty of Quiet, and it's about, and it's particularly about the way in which black bodies, particularly black men's bodies, go through the world always being read onto politically, that they always have this political significance, and you always have to perform to that political significance, but quiet, which is kind of the equivalent of prayer in some, is the ability to have an interior life that isn't always exposed, isn't always being examined, but it's just the restfulness of the interior. And so I'll be interested to see how this expands into a whole opera. But that I was really struck by the circularity of it, with the fourth wall, really seeing mostly from the side, and you got the same thing in
That's interesting. What you just said makes me think of the connection you made earlier with the scene in Le Bleu, Blanc, Rouge where she's dancing, because I think one thing that's striking about that shot is that when she first comes into the party, she's carrying with her a kind of self-consciousness, and even when she starts dancing, her movements are quite contained and self-conscious, and then at some point the people who are around her kind of disappear, and she's dans le cadre, she's in the frame by herself. You don't see anyone else, and that's when I feel like her movements become much more free, and it's as though there is a kind of level of expressivity of an inner feeling that is otherwise always constrained.
And there's a pacing to the music at that point, so it's almost like a heartbeat. I mean, it's like we go into her dream state, or there's the soundscape also frames it as well.
Okay. What time are we?
So do you want to say one or two more things about Le Bleu, Blanc, Rouge de mes cheveux, or shall we? Is there anything that you want to say about why you decided to include that in this series, how you think it connects to some of the other films, respond to what?
I showed it in Detroit a year and a half ago in July, 2 weeks before. I mean, it was the week of the anniversary of the uprising, and I saw that it resonated with so many feelings or concerns of actually the black teenagers who had come to the DIA, see the film that night. And when I made the film, when I made Black Dolls I Rise, I would think about who, if Sena, the character of the film, sees this film, will she like it? Will it, will it mean something? So I had Sena as an ideal viewer. So, yeah.
So if anyone has questions, I think there's a microphone. A question here.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is to Nora. First, a comment. I think for me, as a non-African American, outside perspective, but an African, I thought the Dolls, that the movie about dolls, really, for me, told the story of that era that I haven't read anywhere in books, and nobody's told me about it. So I just, the perspective, that was really interesting. I want to know more. So, question, these dolls, you say they're in a museum, an exhibition, where is that? My second question is to do with a clip of the young children that had the dolls and them pointing, this is an ugly doll, this is a beautiful doll. If you could talk a little bit about that, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments and thank you for your questions. I'll start with the collection. So it's a private collection. So the first show, public show, exhibit was organized in San Diego in 2015, and then the second actually happened in Paris, which is paradoxical. But so now the collection is back to the state of New York, where the collector lives, and I'm sure it will travel elsewhere. There was some interest in Brazil. I don't know what will happen with Brazil now in terms of institutions. So, but the collection definitely resonates with so many, parts of the history, included of nannies actually in Brazil. But I'm sure that there will be other exhibitions in the United States. It just doesn't depend on me. So it's the collector who decides, depending on the curatorial proposal. So, but it will happen definitely. And the books have been published, so at least you can see the photographs of the dolls. The second question. Unfortunately, the footage that you see about the doll test was shot not in the 50s or 70s, 80s. It's in 2008 here in the U.S. The test was designed by a couple of psychologists, Maya and Kenneth Clark, who worked in Harlem, near here actually. So they designed an experiment that they made with hundreds of African American children from 3 or 4 to 8 years old, from 39 to 40 something during the war. Then they published the big article they published analyzing the outcome of this test was in 1947. And so they asked those questions, they are the same questions, and it showed indeed what they analyzed as a tragic, it has explanations, so I don't like the word tragic, but at least a very disturbing lack of self-esteem, etc., and a dissociation of the self in African American children. And the doll was used to make this obvious. Other doll tests have been organized scientifically or not in other countries. It's never been done in France, and I'm organizing with a researchers team, with a scientific team, a doll test right now with some children in the suburbs of Paris. So I'm continuing the work.
And let me just add that the Kenneth Clark test, or the doll test as it's known to most Americans, and in the context of American jurisprudence, this is the test that was used in Brown v. Board of Education. This is the piece of evidence that ultimately convinced the court that separate is not equal. And Brown v. Board of Education is the 1954 Supreme Court case that struck down Jim Crow in the United States, beginning with schools, and it used the 14th Amendment in a way that is now so under threat it makes me weep. But nevertheless, I was sort of startled because it's so much a foundation of of what ended the Jim Crow era, at least as a formal or procedural matter.
And I heard that it was the first time a psychology test or human sciences were used as a proof.
And that's the complex reason that it's under attack, which is that instead of using a system of precedent, it actually uses sociological data rather than than specific witnesses. And that category of expertise as a form of probative evidence is widely under attack in the United States right now, as is the notion of birthright citizenship, but don't make me go there because I will melt into a little puddle right now.
Other questions?
Here.
So, I have a lot of questions. I'm deciding which are more relevant to this moment. My first one is, Nora, for your film, who was the audience you had in mind when you made the film? And I asked that specifically because when you were introduced about where your film has traveled, predominantly in Europe, and the societal context that a film like this would hold in European countries with African and minority populations that are severely infantized. And we have learned that throughout this series. Some of us have known that beyond this series. So a film like this resonates here in a very specific context, and in Europe in a drastically different context. So I kind of want to know who your target audience was in your mind when you made it and why. And the second question about Joseph's film, and you're talking about it traveling and certain Black populations resonating with it. I think we also understand when we view films in our language that's not our native language, and we're reading subtitles, and we lose the nuance. So Joseph's film is starkly different than the films we've seen throughout the series. In the series, we've seen Black women in France reclaiming an agency that was never afforded to them in their respective society and giving voice to those communities. And as we learned, their lives are being threatened actually at home, and they're in danger for claiming that agency. Joseph's film is very, very different because it's taking a perspective of the citizen that has accepted the idea of assimilation. Because the shaving of the hair is not about the hair at all, it's about what the character is willing to give up to be accepted as French. That is a very specific and grave nuance that an audience loses that does not know that societal context, nor has this as a native tongue. So the question there is, how do you feel Joseph's film relates to this collective conversation, and also what your purpose was with your film? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your two questions. I'll answer the second one. I would say that le bleu blanc rouge de mes cheveux is really also speaking to a specifically French audience, because the shaving of a female head resonates so much with the history of liberation and of the women who were shaved in 1945 because they had been, I'm using an understatement, with the German soldiers. So for a French audience, it's really the symbol of humiliation, of unfair humiliation, of really like your own being, stripped from you. And of also, male violence, which, in the footage, in the historical footage, you really see the men, and then they are beating the woman, etc. So, and I've seen that Le Bleu Blanc Rouge has traveled a lot, for instance, to African festivals in Ouagadougou, in Benin. So I don't know what the reaction of these audiences have been to this to the film. I don't know. I don't see such a contrast between what's being told of her what is being narrated of her decision compared to the, let's say, other characters or voices that we hear in other films of the series. She's very young. She's younger than the characters or the directors that we've heard. And it's fiction. It's just one moment in her life. So we understand that she's extremely strong-willed. She has to oppose her father. She has to concile what is not concilable. So we can. What I imagine when I see this film is that this woman, she will continue to fight, and she will continue to do what she wants. So despite the horror that she has to suffer, from in this context from the French state. So I don't see her as as a victim at all. At all. I see the extreme unfair violence of the French state, but I also see her extreme self-determination and might. That's what I feel when I see this film. And regarding my own, of course, so there's one thing. The texts that are being read in the film are mostly very well known here. They are studied at school. You have to imagine that Sojourner Truth is not known at all and not published in France. You have to imagine that Maya Angelou is not translated and not published in France.
Oh, that's my point.
Yeah. So, of course, I had a French audience on my mind. I knew that there were different levels of knowledge, of culture, and of awakeness, I would say, depending on. So I definitely came from a French standpoint. But again, for instance, in Detroit a year and a half ago, I showed films at the DIA, I showed Who Streets, which is about Ferguson, and so I would imagine myself at the time, okay, if I show I like Dolls I Rise in front of this audience, which is mainly African-American in Detroit, 2 years, it was 2 years from that, so now, for instance, when the film will be completed, I have to, to be able to defend not every detail, but every choice, every cut, every word, every frame, everything. So, but I knew from the start that, of course, some texts and some ideas and something are already well known here. But indeed, it was important for me that a non-American audience would actually, find out about this history, and it appears, I don't know because I wasn't there to, for Q&As, etc. But that it won an award audience in India, in London. So it means that it's. 2 weeks ago, I went to l'île de Gorée in Senegal. So that was the most amazing image of this film being screened in Gorée. It will be shown in Benin, in Ouagadougou, in a few weeks. So it's something that escapes you. A film, once you've made it, it's something that travels and that finds echoes that you had not planned. So it's still a bit. It's still a bit new. I have to receive feedback. I had email from Bulgaria, or I loved your film, it was important, but so I have to keep showing it to be able to analyze better what.
I think we have time for one more question. Was there a hand in the back?
I just want to say I'm from the media team, so I'm watching this film series through my job, and I want to say it's fascinating. The necessity of this entire film series is amazing, and just by coming here, seriously, Sunday and today, I discovered so much about France, specifically because France for me, I'm from Lebanon, so Francophone education, and France was like this place of human rights for me in the books. And then I left, school, And then progressively, I just saw that this is just another country that's fucked up. Yeah, and I think the necessity of this topic specifically I see it as the French xenophobia in general, and specifically the racism. It needs to be seen because France, it's still educating its population that it is the place of human rights, and it is not. And I think I just want to compliment you for this series, because the mere fact that race itself, they're now discussing, which I discovered Sunday, removing that word from the vocabulary. This is, for me, is unbelievable how in denial this country is of its issue. And I just applaud you for this. And I'm glad that I'm doing this job just to discover that, and it's great, it's amazing.
Thank you so much. I would like to highlight that it's La Maison Française, which endorses the series, and also the cultural services of the French embassy, which are supporting the series. So France is not monolithic.
No, je parle pas. I'm not talking about the entire country. I'm talking about the system, the French system. Careful. My education of the world comes from France, also in parallel. So there's this nuanced version of it. But I just wanted to say that I'm glad that I'm seeing this right now because it matters.
What's important, I think, is also to think in terms of Europe, because it's not only France, it's Europe, and it's a global also concern. So that was interesting in the film series to invite also scholars from other countries, and we had Brazil on our mind, in thinking about the conversations after the film had other national or cultural areas on our mind. So, but yeah, it's about France, of course.
Vraiment, c'est un compliment c'est un compliment pour l'art, for the culture, because every system needs to change, and that's how we do it. I think France will reach a point where it is as right as it says it is. You get what I mean? And it's books, and I want to reach that point because the disillusionment was heartbreaking for me.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank Nora Philippe again for this wonderful film, for your job curating the series. Thank you so much to Pat Williams for joining us. This has been very much a French-American dialogue. I mean, 2 of the films that we saw tonight were about American, French regard on American culture, aspects of American culture, and that's really been a sort of through line through this whole discussion, through this whole series. We're hoping that there will be a version of this presented at Columbia Centers at Reed Hall in Paris, so it will be in Paris, even if it's in a little American enclave. But I want to thank all of you for coming, and hope that you enjoyed the films and the discussion, and come back. We have 2 more films, Wednesday evening and Friday evening at the Maison Française on Columbia, the main campus. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Thank you so much.